As we have a Bible study this evening from Luke 14, let's ask and answer the question, where should you sit? Now, it's an important question. Have you ever gone and assembled somewhere in a strange place, maybe on a Sunday, you don't know anybody, and you sit down in a seat? And you get these stares because you sat in somebody's seat. And now, here they come, and they look down at you because you're sitting in their seat, and they're confused because you're a visitor. They don't be mean, but that's my seat. Maybe you've experienced that. People sort of enjoy their seats. In fact, I can take mental attendance any Sunday night by remembering where you all sit. You like your seats. And if I say to someone, well, I missed you. Well, I was there. You weren't in your seat. That's how I know. But I missed them, see. So I know we sort of get partial to some seats. So the question is tonight, where should you sit? To do that, we're going to consider what happens here in Luke 14. And as we look at this situation, I want you to see the key word for me in this passage. Listen for the key word, or to notice where it occurs and how it happens. The key word for this entire context is the word watch. Watch. Just notice what's happening. Chapter 14, verses 1 through 6. Here was an event in which Jesus was invited, according to verse 1, on the Sabbath to eat bread in the home of one of the rulers of the Pharisees. Now, these feasts of that day, big fellowship gatherings, were a little different because of their culture than in our day. And we don't get to experience this culture very much, maybe just in a little bit we get to see it. Here's what they were like. Either their feasts, their dinner parties, or especially wedding feasts were set up as a way of saying, now there's a certain place that you're going to be, and it's a place of honor based upon your relationship to the one throwing the dinner party. If you are a really close friend of the one throwing the dinner party, then your seat is closest to the one hosting it. It doesn't mean that you're any better. It's just that you have a closer relationship. And so you would have people sitting in places, and a lot of their dinner feast and their wedding feast were open air situations so that you could go by and walk by and you could see who are the people in the places of honor. And in that culture, to sit in a place of honor was something that they wanted to do. Well, it's just not unlike things that happen with us. We enjoy getting pats on the back. We enjoy getting compliments. We enjoy being honored, and they did too. So what was happening was this feast came up, and Jesus was invited. Well, see, the ruler of the Pharisees thought it would be pretty good to have Jesus come to his feast. Now, notice what happened. At this feast, verse 2, there was a man who had a disease called dropsy. I admit that I have never heard of dropsy, and I've never really looked it up. Here's what I found out. Apparently, dropsy is somewhat akin to the effects that we see from heart failure or kidney failure. And in their day, it was called dropsy because the lower extremities would swell with fluid, because either around the stomach, it would, like the liquid had dropped, dropsy, because the heart wasn't functioning well. Or the kidneys weren't functioning well, and it would drop into the legs. And so it would be painful, but it would also be obvious. And here's a man at the Sabbath who had this disease. Now look at verse 3. Jesus answering, wait a minute, they haven't said anything. Well, Jesus answered a question they haven't yet asked. Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath? And they kept silent. He took him and healed him and let him go. Now, I want you to go back to verse 1. Notice the end of the verse. They watched him closely. Key word, watch. The whole situation was this. Pharisee brought Jesus to his dinner party and watched him. Likely because, think about it, here's a guy hosting a dinner party. Doesn't he know who's coming to his dinner party? He has invited a man who has this disease. He set it up intentionally. He invited Jesus. He invited this man. And now we get them together, and now we're going to watch. They set it up. He put it together so they could see what Jesus would do. Are you going to heal on the Sabbath day? See, they interpreted anything done on the Sabbath day was violating the Sabbath law of not working. The Sabbath law of not working really was this: don't make a profit. Don't go out and work for profit. But Jesus, on one occasion, when asked that question about healing another man whose arm had withered, he said, if you have a donkey or if you have a sheep that gets caught in a ditch or an ox on the Sabbath day, are you going to leave him there? Or are you going to get him out? Well, the point was, you're going to be kind to this helpless creature. That doesn't violate the Sabbath. You're not working for profit by doing that. If you're going to be kind to this helpless animal, why should I not be kind to God's creature, helpless because of a disease? They watched him. Now we go into the text. Now Jesus, according to them, or according to this situation, told this parable. What's it based on? Verse 7. He noted, he watched how they chose their places. Look what's going on. The people are watching Jesus. What are you going to do? You going to heal the guy? Violate the Sabbath? Jesus is watching them. Because as they come to the dinner party, where are you going to sit? That's our question. Where are you going to sit? And then he tells this parable, and he sets it up in a way that really makes sense. Bob Uecker had a commercial. It's an old catcher in baseball, a comedian of sorts. He had an old commercial where he's at a ball game and he's sitting way back and he's a major league player, and somebody says that there's a place right down by the field, and he goes, "Oh, I get to go to the front row." But there's another time in which he is removed from the front row and pushed to the back. And Jesus said, think about it. When you come into this dinner party, if you immediately run to the place of highest honor, and the host comes by and says, guess what? You're in the wrong seat. Everybody's going to know that you have been demoted. Now, their seating was a whole lot different than ours. They didn't sit around a table with chairs. they reclined on couches. And as I was reading about it, the couches had apparently 3 people per couch. And you know what the highest seat was? The one in the middle? Not for me. I like a little more elbow room. But they reclined on couches and they ate, and it was the highest place to be in the middle at the front. Well, can't get away from the wedding theme. Just had one again, right? What do we do at weddings? At receptions? One of the questions asked me yesterday was, where is the bride party table at the reception? I said, I don't know. That was my standard answer for the last week. I don't know. Well, we've been to those things. You know that the bride and the party all sit at a certain place. And then basically, family sits closer. And then everybody else at least tries to get a place under the tent. Doesn't mean they're any less important. Just more connected. That's about as close as we come. Unless maybe you go to a presidential dinner and they tell you you're going to sit here close to the president or not. Maybe if you get to involve in something like that. But these people on a very regular basis were involved in these dinner parties. Now we've set it all up, and let's remember what's happening. The host set it up and he watched. And then Jesus stood back and he watched. The question that we're asking is built upon the same key word. We are all being watched. Every one of us. In fact, it is not possible for us to know how influential we are being or having an influence on somebody else. We can't know it. Not possible. People are watching. They notice us. They see things. They make assumptions. They have thoughts. They're watching us. There was a commercial from television in my many younger years that is so vivid to illustrate this point that I can almost remember the details. There's an old oak tree in a little field. A father and son are having a day. And they sit down under that oak tree and relax. Dad crosses his legs. And the little boy over there looks at Dad and crosses his legs. Dad puts his hands behind his head, and little boy puts his hands behind his head. And they're enjoying the day. Dad pulled out a pack of cigarettes, began to smoke. The little boy reached. That's where the commercial ended. The point is simply this. People are watching. They notice. They see. And there are people making decisions and doing things because of seeing them or not seeing them in our lives. Where should you sit? Let's answer the question with these few concepts from Scripture. Based upon the story that Jesus told, you walk into a dinner feast. Where should you sit? Here are some principles. The higher you sit, the farther you have to fall. James chapter 3, verse 1. My brethren, do not many of you become teachers, knowing that we shall receive a stricter judgment. James is not saying, if you're a Christian, don't aspire to teach. Get away from teaching. Run. Not what he's saying. Here's what he's saying. A teacher has great responsibility. You are up here, which means you have a farther way to fall. So don't become a teacher until you are mature and ready to accept the responsibility. Because the higher you sit, the farther you have to fall. How does that relate to being parents? How does that relate to being an elder in the Lord's church? How does that relate to teaching children in a Bible class? Not discouraging from doing it, but recognizing the importance and the maturity necessary to do it properly. Number 2, where should you sit? Don't choose the place of great earthly glory. You know why? Because earthly glory is like a sugar high. It doesn't last very long and doesn't accomplish very much. If you've done much driving late at night, you've experienced being tired. It's the one time that I find that I can go and eat something that I don't normally eat, which is sugar. And I'll go get a candy bar, and I trade off the burning in my mouth for the sugar high that gets me on down the road. But it doesn't last very long. 1 Peter 1, verse 24. Peter said, all flesh is as grass, and the flower of man is the glory of grass. The grass withers away, and the flower fades. Earthly glory doesn't last very long. It's a temporary high, and it really doesn't accomplish very much. Where should you sit? Number 3, when we decide where to sit, remember this principle. The way to the top starts at the bottom. Matthew 20, verse 26, Jesus said, let it not be so among you, but whoever wants to be great among you, let him be your servant. Jesus was saying this. People who are servants of others rise naturally to the top. Everybody appreciates a good servant. Everybody appreciates a self-sacrificial person. And therefore, just by the nature of the situation, if you are a servant, you will rise in the minds and hearts of those people whom you serve. The way to the top begins at the bottom. Number 4, where should you sit? Remember this. If you sit at the greatest, highest place, you don't have anywhere to go but down. Proverbs 16, verse 18. Pride comes before a fall, and a haughty spirit before destruction. Jesus said, how embarrassing would it be when someone says, wait a minute, you're sitting in a seat that I reserved for somebody really special. You're sitting out there at a card table away from everybody else. How embarrassing would that be? Oh, you still get to eat. You've still been invited. But now you're embarrassed because you were moved down. Number 5, where should you sit? Remember this principle. If you sit in the lowest place, you have nowhere to go but up. Humble yourself in the sight of the Lord, and He will lift you up. I remember well our children who finally became of an age that when we had the big Thanksgiving dinner, they moved from the children's table to the adult table. And that was a big deal. It was a big deal. Started out over there, and where do you? Nowhere to go but up. Where do you sit? The point of this study is real simple. Let us be humble. Let us live lives of humility and service in the sight of others, because they are watching us. And as they watch us, they will make conclusions about us and make responses to us because of what they see in us. They watched Jesus, Jesus watched them, and people are watching us. What seat should you take? Where should you sit? Well, think about those things and maybe even develop further in your mind how this parable relates to that and how it relates in your life and how maybe we can apply these things every day to become more humble in the sight of God. Before we close this night, if you're ready to obey the Lord in baptism, if as a penitent believer you're ready to come to the Lord, being submissive to Him, have your sins removed in the waters of baptism, we're here for you. Or maybe we can just pray with you to help you. We want to be that family for you even tonight, if you'll come as we stand and sing.